Clara's boots crunched over the dry, cracked earth, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the plains. She adjusted the strap of her satchel and squinted at the distant ridge where her father's homestead waited, abandoned for years, a silent monument to a life cut short. She had traveled hundreds of miles alone, braving scorching days and freezing nights, determined to claim what was rightfully hers. Nothing, neither bandits nor wild animals, had been able to break her resolve. Nothing, that is, until she saw him. He appeared almost out of nowhere, stepping from behind a cluster of mesquite trees, his silhouette commanding and calm. Chief Takwa, the Apache leader she had heard whispers of since crossing the frontier, a man of power, of legend, of quiet, unnerving authority. He was taller than any man she had ever met, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the layers of pride and stubbornness she carried like armor. There was a stillness about him that demanded attention, as though the world paused for just a moment when he moved. "Clara," he said, his voice deep and even, yet somehow tinged with amusement. How he knew her name she couldn't imagine, and the thought prickled at the edge of her nerves. "I suggest you turn back," he continued, stepping closer. The wind rustled through the dry grass at his feet, but he did not move with it. He moved against it, deliberate in every motion. "This land, it is not safe for one like you." Clara lifted her chin, refusing to give him even the slightest sign of fear. "I've crossed deserts, rivers, and mountains. I am not afraid of the land," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded fiercely in her chest. "I am here to claim what is mine." Takwa's dark eyes softened slightly, as though he were measuring her spirit. "And yet," he said slowly, "you walk blindly toward danger, alone. You are defiant and proud, but you are not prepared." Her pulse quickened, and a flush of defiance rose in her cheeks. No one, not men, not the land itself, had ever dared question her courage. And yet, in the presence of this man, a strange mixture of irritation and fascination bubbled inside her. She had been warned about Apache warriors, told to stay clear, yet the instinct to challenge him, to show him she was unafraid, surged up in her chest like fire. "I do not need preparation," she said firmly. "I need only to see this through." Her words were steel-wrapped in determination, but inside a flicker of doubt whispered, "Could she survive the wilds without help?" Takwa's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile, as if he understood every thought she dared not speak aloud. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines etched into his face, the strength in his jaw, the intensity of his gaze. "Very well," he said, his voice dropping lower, carrying the weight of a challenge, a promise, and a warning all at once. "Challenge me again, and I will never let you go." The words struck her like a spark to tinder. They were not a threat in the usual sense. They were a declaration, an inevitability, a truth she did not yet fully understand. Her heart raced, a strange mixture of defiance, fear, and something far more dangerous, curiosity. Clara turned her back on him, as if to shake off the weight of his presence, the magnetism of his gaze, the unspoken promise in his tone. She walked on, her steps deliberate, her mind a storm of irritation and intrigue. And yet, even as she moved away, she felt it, the subtle pull of a force stronger than herself, a force she knew she could not ignore forever. The sun dipped lower, casting the ridge into shadow. Clara's hand lingered on the strap of her satchel, tightening as if to hold on to her independence, her defiance. But behind her, almost imperceptible, the quiet certainty of Takwa's words lingered, echoing through the open plains. "Challenge me again, and I will never let you go." Even as she pressed onward, Clara sensed with both fear and thrill that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The sun had barely risen when Clara realized just how unprepared she truly was. The plains stretched endlessly around her, a vast unforgiving expanse of dust, scrub, and jagged rocks, and she was utterly alone. Her legs ached from the long trek, and the water in her canteen was nearly gone. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn back, yet she pressed forward. Pride, stubbornness, and the memory of her father's homestead kept her moving, even as the wind whipped against her face and the first chill of morning crept into her bones. She had thought she knew the meaning of hardship, but the wild had its own rules. Venomous snakes coiled beneath the sparse grass, and hawks circled overhead, their sharp cries echoing across the empty plains. Clara's hands were raw from gripping her satchel and walking stick, and her feet bore blisters from the relentless terrain. Each step became a test of endurance, of willpower, of sheer determination to survive. And yet, amid the exhaustion and fear, the memory of Takwa's presence haunted her. His dark eyes, calm yet commanding, his warning, "Challenge me again and I will never let you go." She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. She did not need him. She could survive. She would survive, but nature had other plans. By midday, clouds had rolled in, dark and threatening. A sudden downpour transformed the red dirt into slick mud, and the rivers she had crossed dry months before were now swollen and violent. Clara stumbled along the edge of a creek, her boots squelching in the water, her satchel sliding against her side. She caught sight of a fallen branch drifting downstream and realized, with rising panic, that she could be swept away at any moment. Her survival instincts kicked in. She scrambled onto higher ground, breath ragged, muscles screaming, heart hammering in her chest. The wind tore at her hair and clothes, and for the first time since leaving home, fear threatened to unseat her courage. Alone, she felt the weight of vulnerability settle deep in her bones. The wild had humbled her, and she hated it. And then she heard it, a sound that froze her mid-step. A low, calm whistle carried across the plains by the wind. She spun around, heart in her throat, and caught sight of him, Takwa. He had been following her, always at a distance, silent as the wind itself. His presence was both infuriating and strangely comforting. "You should not be here alone," he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. There was no anger in his tone, only a quiet authority that made her chest tighten. "This land does not forgive recklessness." Clara's pride flared. "I can handle it myself," she snapped, trying to mask the relief that her body so desperately craved. Takwa's dark eyes softened, though his expression remained inscrutable. "Perhaps," he said, "but it is not strength alone that keeps a person alive. It is understanding, patience, and knowing when to accept help." She turned away, but her steps slowed. She had faced storms, beasts, and the harsh wilderness before, but never had she felt so small, so exposed, and yet so alive. Something about his calm presence reminded her that she was not just surviving. She was learning, adapting, growing stronger in ways she could not have alone. As the rain began to ease, Takwa extended a hand, not in command, but in guidance. "Follow me," he said. And without fully realizing it, Clara did. She followed him through winding paths and hidden streams, marveling at his uncanny ability to read the land. He moved with the confidence of someone who belonged to the earth itself, and she felt a mixture of irritation and admiration. She did not want to admit how much she needed his knowledge, yet she did. By the time night fell, they had found shelter beneath a rock overhang. Clara started a small fire while Takwa hunted and gathered supplies with ease. She watched him in silence, the storm's remnants drumming softly around them, and felt the faintest spark of connection, a dangerous, thrilling spark she refused to name. That night, as she huddled against the cold, Clara's thoughts returned to his warning. She had defied him once, and now, even in her solitude, she sensed the truth of it. Survival alone was possible, but perhaps not enough. Perhaps some challenges were meant to be met not with defiance, but with trust, even in the wild. Clara knew her life was beginning to change, and that the Apache chief, with his quiet, powerful presence, had become an inescapable part of it. The morning mist clung to Clara's skin as she made her way along a narrow canyon path, each step a careful calculation over slippery stones. She had learned much from the previous day, how to read the wind, where to find clean water, which plants were safe to eat. But she had also learned that nature was unpredictable, merciless, and often cruel. The memory of Takwa's calm presence haunted her, though she refused to admit it aloud. Pride, after all, demanded that she survive on her own, but pride could not guard against sheer misfortune. As she rounded a bend, the ground beneath her gave way. A hidden sinkhole masked by loose dirt and leaves yawned like a trap. Clara's heart leapt as she tried to scramble back, but the edge crumbled under her weight. She tumbled into the dark cavity, rolling with the fall until she landed in a heap, bruised and gasping. Her ankle twisted painfully beneath her. Pain shot through her foot, sharp and unyielding, and she realized with a pang of terror that she could not climb out alone. Panic set in. Her cries echoed off the canyon walls, bouncing back at her, mocking her helplessness. The sun climbed higher, and she knew that if she could not free herself, dehydration and exposure would soon become lethal. She thought fleetingly of her father's homestead, of the miles she had traveled, of the stubborn pride that had carried her this far. and now threatened to end her journey before it truly began. And then, through the echoing canyon, she heard it, the sound of footsteps, deliberate, controlled, impossible to mistake. Her pulse quickened. "Takwa," she called, unsure whether hope or fear drove her voice. A shadow appeared at the top of the sinkhole. He lowered himself carefully, his dark eyes assessing her injuries and the precarious situation. "You should not have come this far alone," he said, his voice calm but edged with something sharper. Concern, annoyance, perhaps a mixture she could not yet name. Clara blinked, trying to maintain her composure. I can manage," she insisted, though each word betrayed her pain. Takwa's gaze held hers unyielding, and Clara felt a flicker of that old defiance rise, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of her situation. With a sigh that seemed to shake the air itself, he extended his hand. "Then I shall manage you," he said simply. She hesitated only a moment before allowing him to grasp her, his fingers firm and unrelenting. He pulled her carefully up the steep edge, steadying her with effortless strength. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she stumbled slightly, leaning on him more than she wanted to admit. Takwa's presence was like the earth itself, immovable, enduring, and impossible to ignore. "You are reckless," he said, though his tone was softer now, almost gentler. "This land does not forgive carelessness." Clara's lips pressed into a tight line. "I am not reckless, I am determined," she countered. Though her voice wavered under the pain and the undeniable closeness of him, she wanted to step back to reclaim her independence. But her ankle throbbed painfully, reminding her that strength alone was not enough. Takwa glanced at her, noting the stubborn flare in her eyes, and for a moment his expression softened. "Determination is admirable," he said, "but defiance can be deadly. Remember my words. Challenge me again and I will never let you go." Clara turned her gaze away, focusing on the canyon walls and the path ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. The words stirred something deep within her, a mixture of fear, fascination, and a dangerous curiosity. She could not fully understand the pull he exerted over her, nor did she want to admit that she felt it. After securing her ankle with a strip of cloth torn from her shirt, Takwa led her to a safer path along the canyon's edge. His movements were effortless, a fluid grace that contrasted with her awkward, limping steps. She kept her pride intact, walking slightly behind him, but she could not deny the comfort of his presence, the silent strength that made her feel both protected and exposed in ways she had never experienced. By the time they emerged from the canyon, and the sun hung low in the sky, Clara was exhausted, yet something had shifted within her. She had faced danger alone, yes, but she had also realized that sometimes even the strongest spirit could benefit from guidance, from protection, from someone who saw both her pride and her vulnerability and did not flinch. Takwa's dark eyes met hers one final time before they settled into the evening light, and for a heartbeat the canyon seemed suspended in silence. Clara knew then that their journey together, whether she liked it or not, was far from over. The morning sun cut through the mist like a blade, casting golden light across the rolling plains. Clara stood on a rocky ridge, her ankle still throbbing from the tumble in the canyon, but she refused to let it slow her. Takwa had insisted she rest, and she had stubbornly refused. Pride, she reminded herself, was the only thing keeping her upright, and she had no intention of surrendering it. Not even to him. "You are not ready," Takwa said, his voice calm but firm as he approached. His shadow fell over her, long and commanding. "You think survival is brute strength, but it is not. You will not last without understanding the land. You will not thrive without knowing its secrets." Clara crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "I do not need a guide," she said, though the tightness in her chest betrayed her. She had survived the canyon after all. She could survive anything. Takwa did not answer immediately. He simply gestured toward the plains, the mesas, and the winding river that cut through the valley like a silver ribbon. "Do you see that?" he asked. "That river provides life, but it can also take it. There is a rhythm to this land, a pulse you must learn to feel. If you ignore it, you will be lost." Clara's eyes followed the river's winding path. She had seen rivers before, but she had never considered their moods, their tempers, their subtle signals. Takwa moved closer, kneeling to touch the dirt, letting it sift through his fingers. "The soil tells stories," he explained. "Tracks of animals, the presence of water, the scent of predators. You must listen with more than your ears. With your hands, your eyes, your intuition. She bristled. You make it sound simple. Takwa's lips curved slightly, almost like a smile. It is simple, he said, but not easy. Pride alone will not teach you. Observation, patience, and respect will. Do you understand? Clara hesitated, then nodded, though reluctantly. She was stubborn, yes, but even she could not ignore the logic in his words. Survival required more than sheer will. It required learning, adapting, and, though she hated to admit it, listening. Over the next hours, Takwa led her through exercises that tested every part of her being. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to track the subtle signs of wildlife, and how to move silently through the plains without disturbing the natural balance. Each lesson was laced with subtle challenges, testing her patience, her judgment, and her pride. At one point, he demonstrated a technique for crossing a river without disturbing the current. His movements fluid, almost dance-like. Now you try, he instructed. Clara hesitated, frustration rising as she waded into the shallow water, her foot slipping on a slick stone. This is impossible, she exclaimed. Takwa's eyes darkened, not with anger but with intensity. He extended a steady hand. Impossible is a word for those who refuse to try, he said softly. Focus, Clara. Feel the current, adjust your balance, respect its strength. Do not fight it. Work with it. She took a deep breath and tried again, this time moving with the river rather than against it. Step by careful step, she made it to the other side, breathless but triumphant. For the first time, she felt a spark of humility mingled with pride, a dangerous combination that Takwa seemed to notice without comment. As the day faded into evening, the two sat by a small fire, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and smoke. Clara's muscles ached, her hands blistered from climbing and handling the rough terrain, yet she felt a strange exhilaration. Takwa watched her, silent and steady, as if he were weighing her spirit and her resolve. You are learning, he said finally. But remember, knowledge alone is not enough. Confidence without caution can be fatal. Clara met his gaze, the firelight flickering in her eyes. And defiance? She asked, teasing despite herself. Takwa's dark eyes held hers, unreadable yet piercing. Defiance, he said slowly, can be a weapon, or a trap. You must decide how to wield it. That night, as Clara lay beneath the stars, exhaustion pulling at her body, she realized that Takwa's lessons went far beyond survival. He was teaching her about herself, her limits, her instincts, and the subtle balance between pride and surrender. And though she would never admit it aloud, a dangerous fascination had begun to take root. Takwa, watching from the shadows, felt it too. The spark between them was no longer just challenge or defiance. It was the beginning of something far more powerful, something neither of them could yet name. The next morning the plains were quiet, almost unnaturally so. Clara and Takwa moved in tandem, their steps careful over the uneven terrain, each alert to the subtle signs of life around them. The lessons from the previous day lingered in Clara's mind. The way the wind could tell stories, how the soil whispered secrets if only one took the time to listen. But today the lessons were less about survival and more about trust. They had been following a trail that Takwa had discovered the night before. Faint hoof prints in the soil that hinted at a rival band moving through the area. Clara recognized the tension in his stance, the slightest shift in his shoulders, the narrowing of his eyes. Danger was near, and for the first time she felt the weight of vulnerability pressing against her chest. She had faced storms, wild animals, and her own recklessness, but she had never felt this, watched yet strangely protected all at once. Takwa's voice broke the silence. Stay close. They are near, and they will not hesitate to attack anyone in their path. His words were calm, measured, but the intensity in his gaze left no room for doubt. Clara fell in step beside him, her pride struggling against the relief she felt at having him by her side. Hours passed in tense silence as they tracked the rival band. Clara learned to read subtle signs, the broken branches, the disturbed dirt, the faint impressions in the grass, and she realized that Takwa's lessons were more than practical. They were a way of teaching her to see the world as he did, to understand the rhythms of life and danger alike. Finally, they spotted them, a small group of men moving stealthily through a narrow pass, unaware of the pair watching from a distance. Takwa's jaw tightened and Clara felt her pulse quicken. The rival band posed a real threat, and for the first time, Clara felt the need to rely completely on him. "You will follow my lead," Takwa whispered, almost a growl. "Move only when I say and do exactly as I do." Clara nodded, swallowing her pride. She had no choice but to trust him. As they moved closer, her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the thrill of being in sync with a man whose strength and presence were undeniable. Takwa's movements were fluid, instinctive, almost predatory, and Clara found herself marveling at his skill and precision. The confrontation was swift. Takwa's voice, low and commanding, cut through the tension as he confronted the rival band. Clara watched in awe as his authority dominated the encounter, forcing the intruders to retreat without a single blow exchanged. When it was over, he turned to her, eyes dark and unreadable. "You did well," he said, his tone softer now, almost approving. "You followed, you observed, and you acted when necessary." Clara's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and something she could not name. I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted, surprising herself with the confession. Takwa's lips curved in the slightest smile, a rare softness that sent a shiver down her spine. "Perhaps," he said, "but strength is not always in standing alone. Sometimes it is in knowing when to trust another." They settled near a small stream to rest, the tension of the day slowly giving way to an uneasy calm. Clara watched Takwa as he cleaned his weapons, noting the quiet concentration on his face, the way his muscles moved with practiced ease. She felt a strange pull toward him, a mixture of fascination, respect, and something far more dangerous, desire. And yet her pride remained intact. She would not give herself over completely, not yet. But for the first time she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, leaning slightly against him as if the weight of the day could be shared, if only for a moment. Takwa noticed, of course. His dark eyes lingered on her, unreadable yet intense, as if he could see into the depths of her defiance and admiration alike. The air between them was charged, electric, and Clara realized with a start that their bond was no longer just about survival. It was something deeper, something that threatened to unravel the careful walls she had built around herself. As night fell, the stars twinkling overhead, Clara and Takwa sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. The plains were calm, but their hearts were not. Something had shifted subtly but irreversibly. They were no longer simply teacher and student, protector and defiant traveler. They were partners, bound by shared danger, mutual respect, and a growing, undeniable attraction. And Clara knew, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that whatever came next, she could no longer face it alone, or resist the pull of the man who had become so impossible to ignore. The wind carried the scent of smoke and earth as Clara rode along the ridge, her thoughts heavier than the pack on her back. News had reached her that a neighboring landowner was attempting to stake a claim on her father's homestead while she was away. The thought of losing everything her family had built filled her chest with a cold, gnawing panic. She had fought for this land alone, endured hardship and danger, and now it seemed the universe was conspiring to take it all away. She wanted to turn back, to race to the homestead and confront the intruders before they could lay claim. Yet another part of her, the part she would never admit aloud, hesitated at the thought of leaving Takwa behind. The Apache chief, with his unyielding presence and quiet authority, had become more than a guide. He was a force she had come to depend on, whether she wanted to acknowledge it or not. Takwa rode beside her, silent, sensing her inner turmoil without a word. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful, yet every so often they flicked toward her, measuring, gauging, patient. Clara hated how easily he could read her, how effortlessly he could see through the walls she had built around herself. She had survived the wilds, braved storms, and endured her own stubborn pride. But he was different. He unsettled her, thrilled her, and made her feel things she wasn't ready to name. "You are distracted," he finally said, his voice low, cutting through the quiet like a whip. "You cannot face the land or its dangers half-heartedly." Clara lifted her chin, trying to hide the uncertainty creeping into her voice. "I am not distracted. I am considering my options." Takwa's gaze hardened, a flicker of frustration passing over his features. "Options require clarity, and clarity requires focus. If you allow your heart to divide your mind, you will falter, and faltering here could cost you everything." Her pulse quickened. Was he speaking only of the homestead or of her too? She refused to show the effect his words had on her. "I am capable," she said stiffly. "I can handle my land. I can handle myself." Takwa studied her, his jaw set, then released a breath that seemed to carry both patience and exasperation. "Perhaps," he said finally, "but there are times when strength alone is not enough. Sometimes one must lean on another, not as a crutch but as a partner. You have learned much, Clara, but pride is not always your ally." Her stomach twisted with conflicting emotions. He was right. Of course he was, but she could not bear to admit it. To lean on him was to acknowledge the stirrings in her heart, the desire that had begun to grow between them over shared danger, lessons, and long days in the wild. She was drawn to him, yes, but she had fought so hard to remain independent, to survive without needing anyone, that the idea of surrendering even a fraction of that control felt like defeat. The next hour passed in tense silence as they rode toward the distant ridge overlooking the homestead. Clara's mind raced, weighing duty against desire, freedom against connection. Could she truly trust Takwa? Not just with her life, but with the emotions she refused to name? And yet, every instinct in her body whispered that he was no ordinary man, that his strength, wisdom, and unspoken intensity had become a force she could not resist. At the edge of the ridge, they paused. Below, smoke rose from the homestead, thin and curling. The intruders had arrived, though it seemed they had not yet fully taken control. Clara's chest tightened with both dread and determination. She had a choice: charge down alone, risking life and limb, or allow Takwa's steady presence to guide her through the danger. Her gaze met his, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just the two of them. His dark eyes were unreadable yet piercing, and she felt the pull she had been resisting since the canyon. Her heart wavered between defiance and surrender, between the need to assert herself and the undeniable trust she had begun to place in him. Finally, she exhaled sharply. "We do this together," she said, her voice firm, though her pulse betrayed the tremor of anticipation. Takwa's lips curved, faint but knowing, and he nodded. "Together," he repeated, and the weight of his presence grounded her. In that moment, Clara understood that her heart was no longer hers alone to command. Survival, pride, and duty had taught her independence, but desire, trust, and the magnetic force of Takwa were teaching her a lesson far more dangerous. Sometimes, the strongest heart is the one willing to risk surrender. The sun had barely risen when Clara and Takwa reached the edge of the valley, where the intruders had entrenched themselves. Clara's ankle had healed enough to allow steady movement, but her muscles still ached from the relentless days in the wild. She had ridden and walked farther than she had ever imagined possible, surviving storms, treacherous terrain, and her own stubborn pride. Yet now, standing at the precipice of danger, she felt an unfamiliar tension coil within her, an awareness that her strength alone might not be enough. Takwa surveyed the scene ahead, dark eyes scanning the encampment with the precision of a predator. "We do this carefully," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying both command and reassurance. "One false move, one moment of hesitation, and it will cost us everything." "You must trust me completely." Clara's chest tightened. The words stirred something deep within her, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something far more dangerous. A thrill at the thought of surrendering, even temporarily, to the man whose presence had become impossible to ignore. She swallowed her pride, the stubborn defiance that had carried her this far, and nodded. "I trust you," she said, surprising herself with the admission. Takwa's gaze softened slightly, though the intensity in his eyes remained. "Good," he said, extending a hand. "Stay close. Watch, listen, follow my lead." They moved like shadows, slipping silently over rocks and through brush, every instinct on high alert. Clara marveled at Takwa's skill. Every step he took seemed effortless, deliberate, controlled. She had never seen a man so attuned to his surroundings, so perfectly in command of both his environment and his own body. Following him required her full attention, and for the first time she allowed herself to let go of the need to lead, the need to assert her independence. The confrontation came swiftly. A sentry had spotted them, and the intruders rushed forward, weapons drawn. Takwa's movements were precise and commanding, disarming the threat before a single shot could be fired. Clara's pulse raced as she witnessed his power firsthand. She had survived on her own countless times, but in this moment, She realized the truth. She could not have done this without him. A surge of emotion rose within her. Gratitude, awe, and something far more intimate, far more vulnerable. Her heart hammered as she moved closer to him, instinctively seeking the security of his presence. Takwa glanced at her, and she caught a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Recognition. Approval, desire. You did well, he said quietly. Just for her. His voice carrying a weight that made her shiver. You followed, you observed, and you acted without hesitation. That is the strength of someone who has learned. Clara's throat tightened. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted, the words tasting strange on her tongue, both bitter and sweet. She hated how vulnerable she sounded, but she could not take them back. She had surrendered, if only for a moment, to the undeniable truth of her dependence on him. Takwa's hand brushed hers briefly as he adjusted a strap on her pack, the contact fleeting yet electric. Clara felt her body respond in ways she had spent days denying. Her pulse quickened, a warmth spread through her chest, and her thoughts became a jumble of fear, longing, and exhilaration. As the intruders retreated, defeated, Clara exhaled shakily. The danger had passed, but the tension between them lingered. She looked up at Takwa, her dark eyes meeting his, and felt a flicker of something she could no longer ignore. Respect had deepened into fascination. Fascination had become desire, and now desire had morphed into a tentative surrender, a willingness to trust him with more than just her safety. Takwa's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, as he watched her steady her breathing and regain her composure. You are learning more than survival, he murmured. You are learning yourself. Clara met his gaze, her pride tempered by the new uncharted emotions swirling inside her. And you, she whispered almost unconsciously, have changed me. Takwa's dark eyes held hers for a long, silent moment, and Clara realized that the unspoken acknowledgement between them was something neither could deny. In the quiet aftermath of danger, surrounded by the wild plains and fading sunlight, Clara understood the truth. Surrendering to Takwa, if only for this moment, was not weakness. It was courage, a different kind of bravery, one that required trust, vulnerability, and a willingness to open her heart. And in that surrender, she felt the first real spark of something far more powerful than survival, the undeniable pull of passion and connection that neither time nor distance could diminish. Night had fallen over the plains, the stars scattered like silver dust across the inky sky. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on Clara's face as she sat cross-legged, exhausted but alert. Takwa sat opposite her, his dark eyes reflecting the flames, deep and unreadable. The day's trials had left both of them weary, yet a tension lingered between them, an unspoken energy that neither wanted to confront fully, but both felt in the core of their being. Clara poked at the fire absently, trying to steady her thoughts. She had survived storms, bandits, and the harsh wilderness, but the quiet moments with Takwa were far more disorienting than any danger. His presence unsettled her in ways she had never imagined. He commanded without force, observed without judgment, and yet he saw everything. The defiance she carried like armor, the fear she rarely admitted, and the fluttering heartbeat of desire she could no longer deny. Takwa's voice broke the silence, low and measured. You wonder why I push you so hard, he said. There was no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. Clara looked up surprised. Why? She asked cautiously, almost afraid of the answer. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the dancing flames. Because I see in you what others do not. Strength, resilience, and a fire that refuses to be tamed. But strength without understanding is dangerous. Pride without trust is lonely. I cannot have you lost, or worse, broken, because you refuse to see your own limits. Clara's throat tightened. His words struck a chord, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She had been defiant not out of courage alone, but fear of dependence, fear of losing control, fear of opening herself to someone like him. She looked away, embarrassed to reveal her vulnerability. Takwa shifted slightly as if sensing her inner struggle. Clara, he said softer this time, there is more to me than the chief you see. More than the warrior, the tracker, the protector. Her curiosity piqued. She leaned in slightly, though caution kept her from fully surrendering. More? She asked. He nodded. I have carried loss, he confessed, his voice almost a whisper. I have loved and lost, trusted and been betrayed. It has shaped me, taught me caution, taught me control, but it has also left me wanting something I did not think I could find again. Until I met you. Clara's breath caught. His admission was raw, unguarded, an unexpected glimpse into the man beneath the chief. Her pulse quickened, and she realized with a start that her own walls were beginning to crumble. She wanted to reach out to close the distance, but her pride made her hesitate. She began, her voice barely audible. I've never trusted anyone like this before. I've always relied on myself. And yet, she trailed off, the words hanging unspoken between them. Her eyes met his, and she saw something there that made her chest tighten, understanding, recognition, and something dangerously intimate. Takwa leaned forward, closing some of the distance without breaking the balance between them. And yet you do now, he murmured. That is not weakness, Clara, that is courage. A silence fell over them, comfortable and heavy all at once. The fire crackled. The night wind whispered through the grasses, and for the first time Clara felt the possibility of surrender, not as defeat, but as connection. She realized that the walls she had built around her heart were not impenetrable. They were merely cautious, protective and ready to fall with the right touch. I don't know what comes next, she admitted, the words raw and unrefined. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Takwa's gaze softened, but his intensity did not waver. Then take it one moment at a time, he said. We have both been shaped by the past, but the future is ours to write, together. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and exhilaration. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that survival, pride, and desire could coexist, not as contradictions, but as the foundation of something stronger, something real. The fire crackled between them. The night stretched vast and infinite, and in that quiet space, they shared a tentative understanding that trust had begun, that walls were falling, and that the bond between them was no longer just about survival. It was about hearts, emotions, and something far more dangerous and irresistible: love. The sun was hidden behind a thick bank of storm clouds, the air heavy with the promise of rain as Clara and Takwa rode along the edge of the plains. The distant sound of hooves carried faintly on the wind, and both of them stiffened, instincts honed from days in the wild sharpening like blades. They had faced threats before, but this felt different, more organized, more dangerous. Something about the rhythm of the approaching riders made Clara's heart tighten with unease. Takwa's hand brushed hers briefly as he adjusted her pack, the contact grounding her nerves. Stay close, he whispered. They have followed us for days. Their intent is clear. They want the land, and they will take it by force. Clara's pulse quickened, but unlike before, she did not hesitate. She had learned to rely on him, not blindly, but as a partner, someone whose presence gave her the courage to face what she could not alone. She nodded, gripping her reins tightly, and matched his movements step for step. The attackers came into view, a small band of mercenaries on horseback, faces hard, weapons ready. Clara felt a twinge of fear, but it was tempered by something new: trust. She knew that if she followed Takwa's lead, they could survive this. More than survive, they could triumph. Takwa signaled with a subtle tilt of his hand. They moved silently through the brush, closing the distance without alerting the band. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, not just from fear, but from the exhilaration of working as one with him. Every instinct, every lesson he had taught her came into play. Reading the land, observing the enemy, moving with the current rather than against it. The first clash was sudden. A man broke from the tree line, spear raised, and Clara felt a flash of panic. But Takwa was already there. With fluid precision, he disarmed the man, stepping back only to allow Clara to nudge the assailant out of the way. Her hands shook slightly, but she had learned to act, to anticipate, and for the first time she realized she could be effective without hesitation. Another wave of attackers approached, and Takwa moved like a shadow among them, swift and unrelenting. Clara followed, matching his pace, her movements becoming more instinctive, more confident. When a rider aimed a shot at her, she dodged instinctively, barely thinking, and Takwa caught her arm, steadying her before she could stumble. The contact sent a jolt through her, a reminder of the trust and intimacy that had grown between them. The fight stretched on, tension coiling in every muscle, every breath, every glance. By the time the attackers retreated, exhausted and beaten, Clara was covered in dust and sweat, but she stood tall. Takwa's eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, and she saw something she had not seen before. Pride. Not just for himself, but for her. "You have grown," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Stronger than you realize. Fierce, clever, unyielding, and capable of surrendering when it mattered most." Clara exhaled, the tension leaving her body in a rush. She realized that this battle had not only tested their survival skills, but also their bond. The trust, the reliance, the unspoken connection that had grown over days of shared danger. She had surrendered to him, not in weakness, but in recognition of the strength they shared together. Takwa stepped closer, the distance between them charged with unspoken desire. "We survived because we moved as one," he murmured. "Not as teacher and student, not as protector and defiant traveler, but as partners." Clara's chest tightened. Her pride still lingered, but it was softened by something far more compelling: the undeniable attraction and trust that had been building between them. She felt the weight of his gaze, the steady pull of his presence, and the realization that the wild, dangerous plains had shaped more than just her survival skills. They had shaped her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she did not have to face life alone, that the man beside her, fierce, commanding, and enigmatic, could also be the one who held her heart. As the storm clouds parted and the first rays of sun broke through, Clara and Takwa stood side by side, battered but victorious. The battle had tested them, pushed them to the edge, and proven what they had both begun to suspect: that together they were unstoppable, and that the bond forged in fire, danger, and trust could not easily be broken. The plains were quiet now, bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. The battles were behind them, the storms weathered, and the wild land that had once seemed so unforgiving now felt alive with promise. Clara rode beside Takwa, her hand brushing against his as they moved through the tall grasses, the connection between them unspoken but undeniable. Every challenge, every trial, every moment of fear and exhilaration had brought them here, to a point where survival, pride, and passion intertwined seamlessly. Clara had changed. She no longer relied solely on herself, but neither had she surrendered her independence. Instead, she had discovered a new kind of strength: the courage to trust, the willingness to lean on someone else, and the ability to embrace desire without fear. And Takwa, the Apache chief whose presence had first seemed intimidating and unyielding, had changed too. Beneath his commanding exterior lay a man capable of care, vulnerability, and deep, abiding passion. They paused on a ridge overlooking the valley, where Clara's homestead lay in the distance, safe once more. Takwa's dark eyes swept the horizon, and then he turned to her, his expression softened by something she had rarely seen: openness. "You have grown beyond what I expected," he said quietly, his voice carrying warmth beneath the usual authority. "You have faced danger, hardship, and fear, and yet you stand taller now than the plains themselves. Strong, proud, and unafraid to surrender when it matters." Clara's heart fluttered at his words. For days she had resisted acknowledging the depth of her feelings, the pull she could no longer ignore. But now, with the sun painting his features in gold, she could not deny it. "Takwa," she began, her voice trembling slightly, I never thought I could trust anyone. Not like this. Not fully, but with you." She trailed off, letting the confession hang in the air, fragile yet potent. Takwa stepped closer, his presence both commanding and comforting. His hand reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "And yet you have," he said softly, his dark eyes locking with hers. "And yet you have opened yourself to me. That is more courage than any battle I have ever faced." Clara's pulse quickened. The intensity in his gaze, the raw honesty in his tone made her feel exposed and exhilarated all at once. "I don't want to lose this." "Us," she admitted, the words finally freeing her. Takwa's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "You won't," he said. "We have faced the wild's danger and ourselves. What we share, this bond forged in fire, cannot be broken lightly. It is stronger than fear, stronger than pride, stronger than any storm." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of sage and earth, wrapping them in a cocoon of the vast, untamed land they had conquered together. Clara's hand found his, fingers intertwining with a natural ease that felt like coming home. Every heartbeat, every shared glance, every brush of skin was a testament to the journey they had endured and the trust they had built. Takwa lowered his head, brushing his lips against hers in a soft, deliberate kiss. It was a kiss that spoke of victory, surrender, and the undeniable pull of desire that had grown between them. Clara responded instinctively, her arms wrapping around him as the fire between them ignited fully for the first time. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but in that moment, the world had narrowed to just the two of them, bound by shared trials, mutual respect, and unspoken love. When they finally pulled back, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling, hearts still racing. Neither spoke for a long moment. Words were unnecessary. Their bond had been forged in fire through danger, survival, and trust, and now it had been sealed by passion and devotion. Clara finally whispered, a smile breaking through her weariness. I never imagined it could feel like this. To survive, to trust, and to love. Takwa's dark eyes softened, filled with a warmth that had been absent in the early days of their meeting. Nor did I, he admitted. But now I cannot imagine my life without you. The sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the valley. Together they rode toward the homestead, hands clasped, hearts aligned, and a future waiting to be written. The wild had tested them, the storms had shaped them, and the challenges had strengthened them. But above all, it had brought them to each other. And in the endless, untamed plains, Clara and Takwa finally understood that love, trust, and survival could coexist, fierce, passionate, and unbreakable.